right, so let me share my screen. I think I have it here. Yeah, this is fine. Okay, so let's review subqueries. We saw them on Thursday. One thing, we talked about how subqueries, they allow us to like perform certain tasks like these, whatever we talked about, like these stacked aggregates that just aren't really available with normal SQL. But another way to think about subqueries is they allow us to break our steps in SQL into steps, like break our SQL code into steps. All right, so that's just like it's a good problem solving technique to use subqueries as a way to like, okay, let's get this chunk down, then let's wrap it in a subquery, then move on to the next step. So, all right, we have this telecom data. Let's take a look. So essentially we have these different companies. We have, this, how market cap is essentially the stock price times the number of shares, right? So if you think of like the total value of the company according to like how it's listed on a stock exchange, right? Like you buy one share, but if there's a bunch of shares, obviously. So this is just the stock price times by the number of shares is the market cap. And I'm just curious actually about the data. Like if I want to see, do we have multiple instances of like Comcast? We can do select star from companies, group by the company name, and let's say we do select count star just to see, does a company show up more than once? And let's also do the company name, right? And then maybe we can even order by the as amount, order by the amount, descending. I'm not sure if we have it more than once or not. Okay, it looks like no. It looks like each company is only listed. Wait, am I ordering by the wrong thing? Just make sure. Order by amount descending. Count stars amount. Yeah, I got a little confused because it almost looks like it was in alphabetical, like reverse alphabetical order. But you can see there's only 100. Well, there's only, if I take this out, take out the group by, is there still 100 rows? I guess that's another way. Yeah, there's only 100 rows. Right? You could just do select count star, right, and you see 100. All right, so it seems like each company is only listed once, and for each company we have the market cap and their stock price. All right, that's kind of interesting. Okay, so let's say that what we want to do is just find all of the stocks, all the companies whose stock price is above the average. All right, so like I said, we can kind of break this into steps and use subqueries to do so. So we can do, yeah, I'm recording. So we can do select average, I think it's stock price, I'm not sure, from companies, and like take a look at this. Right, and this would be our first step. Okay, so now we have the average stock price. And the next thing we want to do is really like compare this, find the companies who have a stock price greater than the average. So the first thing I would do is simply wrap this in the parentheses and then do select star from. Okay, and this is what I recommend as doing when you're working with subqueries. It's like this is essentially a way of as assigning this to a variable or like storing this in a function essentially. Like this is our way of breaking it into steps. Like the first thing is just move it to its own component. All right, and make sure everything still works. So we still have this. This looks good, right? So now we're selecting star from this this return value essentially, and we can call this like as average stock price. All right, so now we have this. And now essentially what we can do, instead of selecting star from as we did last time, we can say select star from, notice this is just one value, right? So it's not actually, our subqueries can return different dimensions of the data. Here we're returning a single stock price. So what we can do is say select star from, and this value is basically like what we can use in a where clause. Select star from companies where the stock price is greater than this value, right? So when you're doing these subqueries, it's important that you consider the dimension of the data that your subquery is returning. For instance, if this was returning like a table of values, which we'll see in a second, right? It wouldn't work. Like a where clause, as far as I know, can really only take one value. So you have to make sure that your subquery returns just one value. So these are now all the companies whose stock price is greater than, what do we, it was like 50 something, right? Whose stock price, let's just do this one more time. Whose stock price is greater than 51.9. And now looking at it, right, this looks right. Okay, and we're also, you can see we have a subset of the companies here. Okay, so this is, notice that this is like a different version. Like this is returning different dimension of the data, right, that our subquery is returning, as opposed to what we saw on Thursday. Let me see if I can just go back to that. Right, so I don't like changing data, but right, I think what we did before is we had to like do a group by, and that returned, we had multiple instances of each college before, and what we did was we reduced this, down to the dimension we wanted and used a subquery to do that. So I just want to point this out, right? If we do select star from salaries, okay, and let's check the dimension of our data. So let's do select, let's group by the name. So I think here each college might show up more than once. Group by the name, and let's select name, comma, count star. And that's not fun. Oh, here we go. And let's order by as amount. Order by amount descending. Yeah, okay. So you can see like some of these, and not a lot, but some of these do show up more than once. So what you might want to do, right, is first like average the values. Okay? So for instance here, what we could do is, maybe it is, nah. So what we could do is, let's look at our data one more time. Select the name from salaries. Select star from salaries. Okay, so it's like the data, our data is not exactly in the dimension we want. Maybe another better example is the state name. Like if we want to find the average salary per state, per university by state, we could, let's do this instead. We can group by the state, order by the amount, and select count star. Let me just make sure. No such column state. Oh, state name, I'm sorry. Right, and now we can see, okay, there's like 25 per each. So for instance, now let's say our problem is, let's find the average per state and then find the state that has the highest average. What we could do is to find the average per state, right? We're breaking this up into two steps, right? Which is a good use case for subqueries. So now we would say, select the average mid-pay, mid-career pay from salaries, group by the state name, and we should also maybe put in the state names just so we can see it. And let's order by, just to make some sense of this, order by the average salaries. And I know I need to give this an alias. All right. So you can see, okay, California, New York, this seems to be, my home state of Pennsylvania is higher than I would have thought. But this seems to be like pretty good. Let's just make this, do these three. So now we did the first step, right? We found the average salaries. At this point, you can like think of essentially now we're working with this data. And essentially what we want to do is now if we want to find the state that has the maximum average salary, I guess we already did it with California, but we could also use a subquery for this. So we can wrap it in the parentheses. Again, do the select star first, right? And now notice the dimension of our data is different than what we saw in the previous subquery, right? This is a table of information as opposed to just one value, right? What they call a scalar value in the previous subquery. So here we're returning a table, and now we can select maybe the max of the average salaries, right, from this table, this return table. And let's also return the state name. Okay, and we still get California. Okay, so what is the point? Is like when you're working with subqueries, just pay attention that sometimes the subqueries is going to return a table of data, like we saw with the state name and the average salary. Okay, and sometimes the subquery, so this was going to be like, we saw California had like, I don't know, 80. And this is New York. And it had like 75. So this is where we did, the subquery returned two-dimensional data, right? Rows of data. Now, in the other place, we saw that it returns one-dimensional, not even scalar data. So just one single value, okay? And that was when we did select the average salary, or in this case it was a stock price, right? And then we said, and this returned one value from companies, and then we wrap this in a subquery, right? To do select star from companies where. So with the where clause, we need this to return just one value, okay? When we're kind of querying the table, right, that's obviously returning a table of data. Okay, there's one other example. So here this returns one single value, like 57.5. Here this returns rows of data, right? And then the other example is we can return perhaps a list, right, of which is called a list of data. So this might be like a list of company IDs or something, like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you do select star from companies where ID is in this list of IDs. Okay, so we'd have a subquery that returns us a list of IDs. So just to put names to this, here you can put this as multiple rows, or you can say this is a table. Okay, here where it's one value, this is a scalar. And here when it's a list of values, here are subqueries of vector. Okay. So these are like the three use cases. So I'll show this one in a second. Okay, so for the multiple rows, in all cases, why are we using subqueries? Like to break it into steps, right? We want to find companies where like the stock price is higher than average. So break it into steps. First find the average stock price, then select star from this resulting value, right? Here we want to find the maximum average salary. So what's the first step? Calculate the average salary for each of the states, then find the maximum of that resulting value, right? In this case, we can give an example. Let's say we have, I did one before class. It's something like, let's say we do select all, we'll just do all for now, from companies.
I think you're still on the whiteboard, Jeff.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. So select all from companies where I'll just do this. I just forget what the column names were. Where the company name is like, I'm gonna have to change this to double quotes, I think. Is like what would it be, C percentage, I think. Let's see. Or company name, like, oh, this I think has to be in quotes. Yeah. See if we do better. Okay. So this I haven't shown before. I think a lot of you all discovered it on your own. Like I can select data based on, using the like pattern. I'm not super familiar. I'm guessing this is like a wildcard where it just says essentially like begins with the letter C. So for this example, right, we're getting, again, a table of data, but we can change that to a list if we say select ID from companies, where the company name is like C. And we would expect to get this like 0, 4, 6, 10, 12. Select, here we go. So we get, when we change to the ID, we're now getting a list of values. All right, this is just pandas is displaying this. But really what we're returning is now a list of values. So because we're returning a list of values, we can use the in clause for a subquery because that in clause expects a list, right? So now we can do select star from companies where ID is in, right? Okay, so this thing is really just like a variable. Like what does this thing return or function? You think about what the return value is, right? This is returning a list of all the IDs with the letter C. And now we can find the companies where the ID is in this list, all right? So you can see this gives us all our C companies, okay? So these are like the 3 different use cases of subqueries, right? In each case, you want to think about, just like we think about with functions, you want to consider what's the return value of the subquery. So because of that, what I really recommend doing when you use a subquery is first write the original query, like write the first step, and just like select, get all the IDs of companies with the letter C, right? Then simply wrap this thing in parentheses and do select star from. Just make sure it still works, right? Still works. Now we can move on to like writing our higher level query that references this. So that would be select all from companies where the ID is in this resulting list. Okay. So that's what I recommend as the steps. Use subqueries as a way to like slowly, break your SQL code into steps, see the return value, make sure it works by doing select all from the subquery, and then move on to that other step. Okay. If we want, we can always have subqueries upon subqueries. So we can say we want to turn this into subquery. I want to find the average stock price of companies with the letter C or something like that. We can, I think, wrap this in a subquery, and now do select star from this. Make sure it still works. And now I would just want to find the average stock price. So I do average stock price of my companies with the letter C. Okay, and we get this value. See, this is why, these queries can get, especially some of you in your internships have seen, how complicated these queries can get, and, they're, hundreds of lines long. That's why I recommend, kind of taking this approach of simply wrap it in parentheses, select star from. Now build onto that. All right, questions about this, right? To review, essentially what you want to have down is these 3 different ways of doing subqueries, considering the dimension of the data, that either we're going to return multiple rows, and that's what we want to use. If we want to use subqueries in a where clause, we're considering a scalar, right? We need to make sure our subquery is returning just one value. And then if we're doing it in the in clause, using an in clause, then we need to make sure our subquery is returning a list of values. Okay, in other words, a vector.